You have 48 hours, Ashworth. No extensions this time. Caspian's hands trembled as he ended the call, the loan shark's voice still echoing in his ears. $12,000. That's what stood between his sister Ophelia and another surgery that could save her life. The kitchen of Grandma Rose's diner buzzed around him, but the familiar sounds of sizzling pans and shouted orders felt distant. Chef, table 6 is still waiting on their salmon. Marcus, the youngest line cook, appeared beside him with wide eyes. Caspian snapped back to reality, muscle memory taking over as he plated the dish with practiced precision. The dinner rush at Portland's oldest family restaurant demanded his full attention, but his mind kept calculating. Even with double shifts, he'd never make that kind of money in 2 days. The front door chimed as another customer entered, bringing with it a gust of December wind that made everyone in the cramped dining room shiver. Through the service window, Caspian caught sight of a woman standing just inside the entrance, her expensive-looking dress completely inadequate for the Oregon winter. She hugged herself tightly, scanning the packed restaurant with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Excuse me, miss, do you have a reservation?" Jenny, their lone waitress, approached the newcomer. The woman shook her head, still looking around as if searching for something specific. "Actually, I was wondering if I could speak with the owner. Mr. Henderson's not in tonight. Can I help you with something?" Caspian watched the exchange while finishing another order. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back severely and the kind of posture that suggested she was used to being in charge. But something about the way she kept glancing toward the kitchen seemed off. "Is there a chef I could speak with? I'm interested in discussing catering options for a corporate event." His phone buzzed again. Another message from the collection agency handling Ophelia's medical bills. Caspian closed his eyes briefly, then made a decision that would change everything. "I'll talk to her," he called out to Jenny, untying his apron. "Marcus, take over the grill." The moment he stepped into the dining room, the woman's attention fixed on him with an intensity that caught him off guard. Up close, he could see she was shivering despite her attempts to hide it. "You're the chef?" she asked, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Iris. Iris Consulting. Caspian Ashworth." Her handshake was firm, businesslike, but her fingers were ice cold. "You're freezing. When's the last time you ate something warm?" The question seemed to surprise her. She blinked, as if no one had asked her that in years. That's not really important right now. I wanted to discuss catering for my company's year-end party." Caspian studied her face. Something didn't add up. Corporate types usually scheduled these conversations weeks in advance, not during the dinner rush on a Tuesday night. And they certainly didn't show up underdressed for a Portland winter. "Look, I appreciate the business inquiry, but you're going to catch pneumonia standing here in that outfit." Without thinking, he shrugged off his jacket and held it out to her. "Take this." She stared at the worn leather jacket as if he'd offered her a live snake. "I couldn't possibly. It's not a loan. It's basic human decency. You can return it when you're not turning blue." For a moment, her carefully constructed professional mask slipped, revealing something vulnerable underneath. She accepted the jacket with hands that shook slightly, whether from cold or something else, he couldn't tell. "Thank you," she said quietly, pulling it around her shoulders. "That's very kind." The jacket swallowed her small frame, making her look younger, more approachable. Caspian found himself studying the curve of her neck where a few strands of hair had escaped her tight bun. "About that catering job," he said, forcing himself to focus. With Ophelia's deadline looming, he couldn't afford to pass up any opportunity. "What kind of event are we talking about?" She seemed to regain her composure, straightening her shoulders. "Approximately 50 people. Upscale, but not too formal. Budget is flexible. Too vague. Most corporate clients came in with specific menus, dietary restrictions, exact headcounts. Either she was lying about the event, or she wasn't really the decision-maker she claimed to be. "When would this be happening?" he pressed. "I'm still finalizing the date. Perhaps we could meet tomorrow to discuss details? I'd like to sample some of your signature dishes first." Before he could respond, his phone rang again. The same number as before. His stomach dropped as he realized the loan shark was calling back, probably wondering why he'd hung up so abruptly. "I have to take this," he said, stepping toward the kitchen. "But yes, let's meet tomorrow. Come by around 2, after the lunch rush dies down." She nodded, clutching his jacket tighter around herself. "Caspian, thank you again. For the jacket, I mean." He managed to smile despite the knot in his stomach. Keep it as long as you need it. As he disappeared into the kitchen to face the call that could determine his sister's fate, he didn't notice the way Iris watched him go, or how her expression shifted from professional interest to something far more complicated. Outside, the December storm continued to rage, but inside Grandma Rose's diner, two lives had just collided in ways neither of them could possibly understand. The phone kept ringing in Caspian's hand, each tone a countdown to a future he wasn't sure he could face. Isadora Vale stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of her penthouse suite, the worn leather jacket draped over her shoulders looking completely out of place against the marble and gold fixtures. She should have returned it immediately, should have sent her assistant with a generic thank you note and moved on with the acquisition plans. Instead, she found herself running her fingers along the jacket's weathered seams, catching the faint sense of kitchen spices and something distinctly masculine that made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't want to examine. Her phone buzzed on the granite countertop. Lysander's name flashed on the screen. The board meeting's been moved to Thursday, her half-brother announced without preamble when she answered. Henderson's lawyer is stalling on the restaurant sale. We need to apply more pressure. Isadora walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland, the city lights blurring as rain streaked the glass. What kind of pressure? The kind that makes stubborn old men see reason. I've already contacted our friends about accelerating the Ashworth situation. Her stomach clenched. What Ashworth situation? The chef's sister owes our associates $12,000 in medical bills. Turned out to be quite convenient when we needed leverage on someone close to the restaurant. Lysander's voice carried that cold satisfaction she'd grown to hate. Amazing how quickly people become reasonable when family members are involved. The leather jacket suddenly felt heavy on her shoulders. You're using loan sharks to pressure a chef? I'm using available resources to secure a business transaction. The restaurant's emotional value is making Henderson irrational. Sometimes you need to create urgency through alternative channels. Isadora closed her eyes, remembering the way Caspian's hands had shaken when his phone rang, the genuine kindness in his gesture despite his obvious distress. Call them off. Excuse me. The loan sharks. Call them off. Find another way. Silence stretched between them before Lysander laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. Since when do you develop a conscience about business tactics? This deal is worth $50 million, Izzy. Don't tell me you're going soft. I'm telling you to find another approach. We're not criminals. No, we're pragmatists. The restaurant gets demolished next month either way. This just speeds up the inevitable. The line went dead. Isadora set the phone down with trembling fingers. $50 million. The number that had driven every decision for the past 6 months. Ever since Lysander convinced the board that developing the restaurant's historic block would position Vale Hospitality as Portland's premier luxury destination. She'd never questioned the financial projections, never asked about the human cost. The restaurant was just another obstacle to remove, another number on a spreadsheet. Until she'd stood in that cramped dining room and watched a man give away his only jacket to a stranger. The next afternoon, Isadora sat in her Mercedes outside Grandma Rose's diner, wearing jeans and a simple sweater she'd purchased that morning from a department store. The clothes felt foreign against her skin, but they were necessary for maintaining her cover as Iris, the small-time consultant. Through the window, she could see Caspian moving behind the counter, his movements efficient and graceful as he prepared plates. The lunch crowd had thinned, leaving only a few customers scattered throughout the dining room. She checked her appearance in the rearview mirror one final time, then stepped out into the December afternoon. The bell above the door announced her arrival. Caspian looked up from the register, his face brightening when he saw her. "You came back," he said, wiping his hands on his apron. "And you're still wearing my jacket." Heat crept up her neck. She'd put it on without thinking, drawn to its warmth and the way it made her feel protected. "I was planning to return it today. Keep it a while longer. Looks better on you than it ever did on me." His smile was genuine, uncomplicated in a way that made her chest tighten. "Ready for that tasting menu?" She nodded, following him to a corner booth that offered privacy from the other customers. The restaurant looked different in daylight, shabbier but somehow more authentic. Mismatched chairs surrounded tables scarred by decades of use, and the walls displayed faded photographs of Portland's early days. "This place has history," she said, studying a picture of the original building from 1952. My boss bought it from the original owner's granddaughter about 10 years ago. Henderson's not much of a businessman, but he kept the soul of the place intact. Caspian slid into the seat across from her. The granddaughter apparently loved this restaurant more than anything, but couldn't afford to keep it running after her grandmother died. Isadora's throat constricted. The granddaughter, her grandmother Rosa, who'd filled this space with laughter and the smell of fresh bread every morning for 40 years. The woman whose recipes still lived in Isadora's memory, even if she'd buried them beneath boardroom presentations and profit margins. "Are you all right?" Caspian was studying her face with concern. "You look pale." "Fine. Just hungry." She forced a smile. "Tell me about your signature dishes." For the next hour, Caspian brought out plate after plate of food that made her taste buds sing. Herb-crusted salmon with a lemon reduction that reminded her of Sunday dinners from her childhood. Braised short ribs, so tender they fell apart at the touch of a fork. A chocolate souffle that melted on her tongue like a promise of happiness. "This is incredible," she said, meaning every word. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Culinary school, lots of practice, and pure necessity. When you're cooking for 60 covers with a skeleton crew, you learn to make every dish count." He leaned back in his chair, his earlier tension replaced by the quiet confidence of someone in his element. "What about you? How did you get into consulting?" The lie came easier than it should have. "Started in finance. Moved into business consulting when I got tired of just crunching numbers. I like helping small businesses find their potential." "And what potential do you see here?" The question caught her off guard. She looked around the worn dining room, seeing it through his eyes rather than a developer's spreadsheet. Authenticity. Heart. The kind of place that builds community instead of just serving food. Exactly. His eyes lit up with passion that made her pulse race. "Henderson talks about selling sometimes, especially when the bills pile up. But this place means something to people. It's not just another restaurant." Guilt twisted in her stomach like a physical pain. She was the reason Henderson was under financial pressure. Her company, her board, her family's greed threatening to destroy the one place that still held pieces of her grandmother's love. "Caspian." She leaned forward, needing to tell him something. Anything that might ease the weight of her deception. "If someone were trying to buy this place, to tear it down, would you fight for it?" His expression grew serious. "With everything I have. Some things are worth more than money." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Why do you ask?" The simple touch sent electricity through her entire body. When was the last time someone had looked at her like she mattered, not for her wealth or connections, but for the person beneath the corporate armor? "Just curious about your commitment to the place," she managed, pulling her hand back before she did something stupid like confess everything. His phone buzzed on the table between them. She caught a glimpse of the screen before he could turn it over. "Payment overdue, final notice." "Sorry," he said, the earlier warmth draining from his voice. "I should probably get back to prep for dinner service." "Of course." She stood, reaching for her purse. "What do I owe you for the tasting?" "Nothing. Consider it a preview of what we could do for your corporate event." He walked her to the door, his movements stiff with renewed stress. "When did you say that party was happening?" Another lie balanced on her tongue, but looking into his eyes made it impossible to speak. "I'll let you know soon. I need to check with my partners first." He nodded, holding the door open for her. "Drive safe, Iris. The roads are getting icy." She paused on the threshold, his jacket still wrapped around her shoulders like an embrace. "Caspian, whatever's going on with those phone calls, I hope it works out." Something shifted in his expression, surprise mixing with gratitude. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As she walked to her car, Isadora felt the weight of his gaze following her. She'd come here to assess the target, to find weaknesses that would make the acquisition easier. Instead, she'd found something infinitely more dangerous, a reason to care about the consequences of her family's ambitions. Her phone rang as she started the engine. "Lysander again. The Ashworth deadline got moved up," he said without greeting. 24 hours now. Apparently our associates are eager to close this particular account." The line went dead, leaving Isadora staring at the restaurant through her windshield, watching Caspian's silhouette move behind the lit windows like a man unaware that his world was about to collapse. Caspian's hands shook as he counted the cash in the register for the third time. $237. Even if he worked every shift for the next week, it wouldn't be enough to satisfy the collection agency's demands. The kitchen felt suffocating as the dinner rush wound down. Each time his phone buzzed, his heart rate spiked, expecting another threatening call. Instead, he found a text from Ophelia's nurse, patient requesting to see you. Vitals stable, but she's asking questions about the bills again. He stripped off his apron and grabbed his keys. Portland General Hospital was a 20-minute drive through downtown traffic, but tonight the streets seemed longer, each red light another reminder of time running out. Ophelia's room on the third floor always smelled like disinfectant and false hope. His sister looked small against the white sheets, her blonde hair thin from the chemotherapy treatments they could barely afford. "You look terrible," she said when he walked in, her voice hoarse but still carrying that stubborn spark that had gotten her through 2 years of cancer treatments. "Thanks for the ego boost." He pulled up the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone's been using my body for target practice. But that's not why I called you here." She struggled to sit up straighter. "Caspian, I know about the money." His stomach dropped. "What money? Don't lie to me. I see the bills when the nurses think I'm sleeping. I hear the phone calls you take in the hallway." Tears gathered in her eyes. $12,000 for the surgery consultation alone. How much do we owe total? The number stuck in his throat like a physical obstruction. "It doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. It matters to me. This is my life, my choice." She reached for his hand with fingers that felt like paper. "I want you to stop." "Stop what?" "The treatments. The surgery. All of it." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I'm tired of watching you destroy yourself trying to save someone who might not be savable." "Don't say that." He squeezed her hand, fighting back his own tears. "The doctors said the new treatment protocol has a 70% success rate. And what about the 30% failure rate? What happens to you if I die anyway and you've bankrupted yourself for nothing?" Before he could answer, his phone rang. The same number that had been haunting him for weeks. This time, he answered. "Mr. Ashworth? This is Vincent Torres with Cascade Financial Recovery. I believe we've been trying to reach you. I know what you want. I just need more time. I'm afraid time is something we can't offer. Our client has been very patient, but patience has limits. You have until tomorrow night to arrange payment, or we'll need to explore alternative collection methods." "What does that mean?" "It means your sister's treatment stops. Permanently. The hospital won't continue care for patients whose families can't meet their financial obligations." The line went dead. Caspian stared at the phone, the threat echoing in his mind. Who was that? Ophelia's voice was barely a whisper. "Nobody important. Just work stuff." She studied his face with the intensity that had always made lying to her impossible. "You're in trouble, aren't you? Real trouble." Before he could deny it, someone knocked on the door. A woman in jeans and a familiar leather jacket stepped into the room, carrying a small bouquet of flowers from the hospital gift shop. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Iris said, her eyes moving between Caspian and Ophelia with genuine concern. "I was visiting a friend down the hall and saw you come in. I wanted to check if everything was okay." Caspian stood quickly, his face flushing with embarrassment. "Iris, this is my sister Ophelia." "Ophelia, this is Iris. She's a consultant I've been working with." "Working with?" Ophelia raised an eyebrow, the gesture so familiar it made his chest ache. "That's an interesting way to describe someone who follows you to the hospital." "I wasn't following him," Iris said, moving closer to the bed. "I was here visiting my business partner's mother. She's recovering from hip surgery." The lie came smoothly, but Caspian caught the slight hesitation before she spoke. "Your jacket looks familiar," Ophelia said, studying the worn leather. "Isn't that the one you've had since culinary school?" Heat crept up Caspian's neck. "She was cold the other night. I lent it to her. And you haven't gotten it back yet?" Ophelia's eyes sparkled with mischief despite her obvious exhaustion. "How long has it been?" "A few days," Iris answered, running her fingers along the jacket's sleeve. "I keep meaning to return it, but it's been useful in this weather." "I bet it has." Ophelia's smile held too much knowledge. "My brother's always been a gentleman, sometimes too much for his own good." An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Caspian could feel Iris watching him, taking in the medical equipment, the charts hanging from the foot of the bed, the obvious signs of serious illness. "I should go," Iris said finally. "I didn't mean to intrude on family time." "You're not intruding," Ophelia said quickly. "Actually, I was just telling Caspian that he needs to get out more. Make some friends outside of that kitchen." Ophelia, Caspian warned. What? It's true. You work 16-hour days, come here to worry about me, then go home to worry about everything else. She turned to Iris. When's the last time he did something fun? Something that wasn't about work or medical bills? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Iris looked at Caspian with something that might have been understanding or pity or something else entirely. Maybe we could change that, she said softly. There's a farmer's market downtown on Saturday mornings. I usually go to scout ingredients for events. If you're interested in getting out of the restaurant for a few hours? Caspian opened his mouth to refuse, to explain that he couldn't afford to take time off, that every hour away from work was money they couldn't spare. But something in Iris's expression stopped him. That sounds perfect, Ophelia said before he could speak. He loves farmers markets. Used to drag me to them every weekend when we were kids. I remember, Iris said, though Caspian couldn't recall ever telling her that story. Saturday morning then? Say 9 o'clock? He found himself nodding despite every logical reason to refuse. Okay, 9 o'clock. After Iris left, promising to see him Saturday, Ophelia waited exactly 30 seconds before pouncing. She's in love with you. What? That's ridiculous. She's a client. Clients don't follow you to hospitals. They don't wear your jacket for days. And they definitely don't look at you like you hung the moon. Ophelia's voice grew serious. But there's something else there. Something she's not telling you. Everyone has secrets, Ophelia. Not like this. The way she looked around this room, like she was memorizing details. The way she answered questions just a beat too slowly. Ophelia reached for his hand again. Promise me you'll be careful. Careful of what? Of falling for someone who might not be who she claims to be. As he drove home through the quiet Portland streets, Caspian couldn't shake his sister's words. There had been something off about Iris's appearance at the hospital, something too convenient about her explanation. But when he thought about Saturday morning, about walking through the farmer's market with someone who looked at him like he mattered, the doubts faded. For the first time in months, he had something to look forward to that wasn't connected to debt or desperation. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Looking forward to Saturday. Sleep well. He stared at the message, wondering how she'd gotten his number, then decided he didn't care. In a world where everything seemed to be falling apart, maybe it was okay to hold on to something that felt right, even if it might not last. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to find $12,000. Tonight, he'd let himself imagine what it would be like to spend a morning with someone who made him forget, even briefly, about everything else. The Vail Hospitality Boardroom on the 32nd floor of downtown Portland's newest skyscraper commanded a view of the entire city. Isadora sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, watching board members file in for the emergency meeting Lysander had called. She'd spent the morning at the farmer's market with Caspian, wandering between stalls of winter vegetables and artisanal breads, listening to him talk about seasonal cooking with a passion that made her chest ache. For 3 hours, she'd almost forgotten who she was, what she was supposed to be doing. Now, surrounded by gray suits and calculating stares, the weight of her deception settled back on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Ladies and gentlemen, Lysander began, his voice carrying across the room with practiced authority. Thank you for joining us on short notice. We have some developments regarding the Pioneer Square project that require immediate attention. Vivian Blackwood, Vail Hospitality's chief financial officer, activated the wall-mounted display. Architectural renderings filled the screen, showing gleaming towers of glass and steel where Grandma Rose's diner currently stood. The City Planning Commission approved our preliminary designs yesterday, Vivian announced. Construction can begin as early as February, pending acquisition of the final property. Board member James Morrison leaned forward. I thought Henderson was being difficult about selling. What's changed? Lysander smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. Mr. Henderson is discovering that maintaining an aging restaurant in today's economic climate presents certain challenges. His insurance premiums have increased substantially, his equipment keeps breaking down, and his staff turnover has been problematic. Isadora's phone buzzed under the table. A text message from Caspian. Thank you for today. Hadn't laughed like that in months. When can I see you again? Her throat constricted as she looked up at the architectural plans that would erase everything Caspian cared about. What about the environmental impact studies? She asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. A building that size will change traffic patterns, parking availability for existing businesses. All handled, Lysander replied smoothly. The city is eager for the tax revenue and job creation. A few small businesses relocating is a minor inconvenience compared to the economic benefits. Small businesses employ people too. They're part of what makes neighborhoods authentic. The room fell silent. Board members exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her objection to a project she'd initially championed. Izzy, Lysander's voice carried a warning. Perhaps we should discuss your concerns privately. No, I think this is exactly the right forum. She stood, moving to the window that overlooked Pioneer Square. From this height, Grandma Rose's diner looked insignificant, just another dot in the urban landscape. When did we become the kind of company that destroys communities for profit? Since profit became how we stay in business, Morrison said dryly. This project represents a 40% increase in quarterly revenue projections, built on the graves of family businesses that have served this community for decades. Vivian cleared her throat. Isadora, perhaps you need to step back from this project. You seem emotionally compromised. Emotionally compromised? The words came out sharper than intended. Since when is considering the human cost of our decisions emotional compromise? Lysander moved to stand beside her at the window. What's really going on here? This isn't like you. She thought about Caspian's face when he talked about preserving something meaningful, about Ophelia fighting cancer while drowning in medical debt, about the way the restaurant staff treated each other like family. Maybe I'm finally remembering who I used to be. Who you used to be doesn't pay shareholder dividends, Morrison interjected. We have a fiduciary responsibility. We also have a moral responsibility. Lysander's hand closed around her elbow, his grip just tight enough to be uncomfortable. I think we need a brief recess. 15 minutes, everyone. He guided her out of the boardroom and down the hall to his corner office, closing the door behind them with deliberate force. What the hell is wrong with you? He demanded the moment they were alone. 6 months of planning, and now you're developing a conscience. I've been thinking about Grandmother Rosa. His expression softened slightly. This again? Izzy, she's been dead for 15 years. You can't run a business based on sentimental attachment to places that remind you of childhood. Can't I? That restaurant meant everything to her. She built it from nothing, turned it into a place where people felt welcome, fed. The words came faster now, powered by weeks of suppressed guilt. We could renovate instead of demolish. Preserve the character while updating the infrastructure. At twice the cost and half the profit margin. Lysander moved behind his desk, his posture shifting into negotiation mode. I understand you're feeling nostalgic, but business is business. Henderson can't afford to keep the place running anyway. We're offering him a graceful exit. A graceful exit you engineered by pressuring his staff financially. Lysander's eyes narrowed. What do you know about staff pressure? Too much. She knew about Caspian's desperation, about Ophelia's medical bills, about the collection agency calls that made him look like he was drowning. I know you're using loan sharks to squeeze people who can't fight back. I'm using all available resources to complete a business transaction. If Henderson's employees have financial difficulties, that's not our concern. It is when we're the ones causing those difficulties. Prove it. The challenge hung between them like a gauntlet. Show me one piece of evidence connecting Vale Hospitality to anyone's personal financial problems. She couldn't, of course. Lysander was too smart to leave obvious paper trails. But she'd heard him on the phone, seen the satisfied expression when he talked about applying pressure through alternative channels. I want you to call off whatever arrangements you've made with collection agencies and loan sharks. Even if such arrangements existed, which I'm not admitting, why would I do that? We're 3 weeks away from finalizing the biggest deal in company history. Because I'm still CEO of this company. Are you? He leaned back in his chair, studying her with the calculating gaze she remembered from their childhood, when he'd plot elaborate schemes to get what he wanted. The board seemed concerned about your judgment just now. Emotional compromise was the phrase Vivian used. The board trusts my leadership. The board trusts profitable leadership. Keep sabotaging major deals, and they might start wondering if you're still the right person for the job. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Isadora felt the familiar corporate machinery grinding around her, the same ruthless efficiency that had built Vale Hospitality into an empire and cost her nearly every personal relationship she'd ever valued. I need time to think. You have until Monday. The board meets to finalize the Pioneer Square timeline, and I need to know you're committed to seeing this through." He stood, smoothing his tie. "Whatever personal crisis you're having, work it out over the weekend. Come Monday, I need the old Izzy back. The one who understood that sentiment doesn't pay the bills." As she left his office, Isadora's phone buzzed again. Another message from Caspian. "Hope your business meeting went well. Looking forward to dinner tomorrow night if you're still available." Dinner tomorrow night. She'd agreed to it at the farmer's market, caught up in the easy rhythm of their conversation, the way he looked at her like she was someone worth knowing. Now she realized she'd have to sit across from him and pretend she wasn't part of the machinery preparing to destroy everything he cared about. She'd have to smile and laugh and continue the lie that was becoming harder to maintain with every passing hour. But as she stood in the elevator descending toward street level, watching the floors count down toward the world where Caspian lived and worked and hoped, she knew she couldn't stay away. Whatever happened on Monday, whatever choice she made about the restaurant and the company and her own future, she needed these stolen moments with someone who saw past the corporate armor to something worth saving underneath, even if it meant lying to both of them about who she really was. Caspian straightened his tie for the third time, checking his reflection in the bathroom mirror of his cramped apartment. The dinner reservation at Le Bernardin was way beyond his budget, but Iris had insisted on somewhere special, and he'd managed to scrape together enough for one night of pretending he wasn't drowning in debt. His phone rang as he reached for his keys. Unknown number, but he'd learned to answer every call these days, hoping for a miracle. "Mr. Ashworth? This is Dr. Martinez from Portland General. I need to speak with you about your sister's treatment plan." His hand froze on the doorknob. "Is she okay?" "Physically, she's stable, but there's been a development regarding her care coverage. Could you come in tonight? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. I have dinner plans. Can't this wait until morning?" "I'm afraid not. The decision affects her treatment schedule starting tomorrow." Caspian closed his eyes, knowing what this meant. The collection agency had followed through on their threat. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He texted Iris on his way to the hospital, explaining the family emergency, promising to make it up to her. Her response came back immediately. "Don't worry about dinner. Is there anything I can do to help?" The kindness in her message made his chest ache. In a world where everything seemed to be falling apart, Iris had become his anchor, the one person who made him believe things might work out. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your sister's insurance coverage has been suspended pending resolution of outstanding balances. Without payment by Monday morning, we'll have to discontinue her treatment plan." "How much time does that give us? For the surgery she needs?" "Not long. The longer we wait, the more complicated the procedure becomes." Caspian sank into the chair across from the doctor's desk, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. "What if I signed over everything? My apartment, my car, whatever equity I have?" "Mr. Ashworth, even if you liquidated everything you own, it wouldn't cover the full amount. And that assumes you could find buyers quickly enough. There has to be something." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. "There is one option. The hospital has a hardship program for extreme cases. If you can document complete financial insolvency, they might be willing to absorb some of the costs." "What does that mean?" "It means declaring bankruptcy, losing everything officially so the hospital can write off the debt as charitable care." Bankruptcy. The word hung in the air like a death sentence for any dreams he'd had of opening his own restaurant, of building something lasting. "How long do I have to decide?" "The paperwork needs to be filed by Monday morning if we're going to proceed with her surgery." Caspian left the hospital in a daze, walking through downtown Portland without destination or purpose. The city looked different now, all sharp edges and harsh lights. Every storefront a reminder of opportunities he'd never have if he destroyed his credit to save his sister's life. Not that it was really a choice. Ophelia's life was worth more than his dreams, more than his pride, more than the future he'd planned. He found himself standing outside Grandma Rose's diner, staring through the windows at the familiar chaos of dinner service. Through the kitchen pass, he could see Marcus struggling to keep up with orders, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. The front door opened and Henderson emerged, his face grim with the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting a losing battle. "Caspian, what are you doing here? I thought you had a date tonight." "Family emergency. Mind if I help out for a few hours? Looks like you could use an extra hand." Henderson's relief was visible. Marcus called in sick, and we're completely slammed. I was about to start turning people away. Caspian tied on his apron and stepped into the familiar rhythm of the kitchen, letting muscle memory take over while his mind processed the day's revelations. The familiar sounds of sizzling pans and shouted orders provided a strange comfort, a reminder that some things remained constant even when everything else was falling apart. Around 10 o'clock, the dinner rush finally subsided. Henderson appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression troubled. "We need to talk," he said, gesturing toward the small office behind the kitchen. Caspian followed him into the cramped space, noting the stacks of unpaid bills covering the desk, the calculator with numbers that didn't add up to hope. "I'm selling the restaurant," Henderson said without preamble. "Got an offer I can't refuse." "What kind of offer?" "The kind that pays off all my debts and leaves enough for retirement. Some big corporation wants to buy the whole block for development." Caspian felt the world shift beneath his feet. First Ophelia's treatment, now the restaurant. Everything stable in his life was dissolving simultaneously. When papers get signed Monday morning, new owners take possession immediately. Henderson's voice carried genuine regret. "I'm sorry, son. I know this place means something to you. What about the staff? Jenny, Marcus, everyone else? They'll have to find other jobs. The new owners aren't interested in keeping the restaurant running." Henderson pulled out an envelope from his desk drawer. "This is for you. 2 weeks severance and a reference letter. It's not much, but it's what I can afford." Caspian took the envelope without opening it. 2 weeks' pay wouldn't make a dent in Ophelia's medical bills, but at least it was something. "Do you know who's buying it?" "Some hospitality company. Vale something. Their lawyer handled all the negotiations." Vale. The name triggered a memory, something Iris had mentioned about working with hotel chains. But that was probably just coincidence. He walked home through the quiet streets, the envelope heavy in his pocket, the weight of Monday's impossible deadline pressing down on him like a physical force. Bankruptcy, unemployment, and his sister's life hanging in the balance. How had everything gone wrong so quickly? His phone buzzed with a text from Iris. "Hope everything is okay with your family. Call me when you can." Instead of calling, he found himself walking to the address she'd given him for her consulting office, needing to see a friendly face, to tell someone about the disaster his life had become. The building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the heart of downtown's financial district. Expensive. Too expensive for a small-time consultant. The directory in the lobby listed dozens of companies, but no Iris Consulting. He rode the elevator to the 20th floor, where the address should have been, and found himself facing a reception desk with a logo he recognized from the news. Vale Hospitality. "Can I help you?" the security guard asked. "I'm looking for Iris Consulting. This is the address she gave me." The guard checked his computer. "No company by that name in this building. Are you sure you have the right address?" Caspian stared at the Vale Hospitality logo, pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. Vale Hospitality, the company buying Henderson's restaurant. The company that was going to tear down everything he cared about. "Actually," he said to the guard, "I think I'm looking for someone who works for Vale Hospitality. Iris. I don't know her last name. I can't give out employee information, but if you want to leave a message, I can see if anyone by that name works here." Caspian shook his head, backing toward the elevator. "No message. I think I understand now." As the elevator descended toward street level, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Vale Hospitality's main line. The automated directory offered several options, but he selected the one for executive offices. "Vale Hospitality, how can I help you? I'd like to speak with someone about the Pioneer Square development project." "One moment, please." The line clicked over to another extension. Isadora Vale's office. This is her assistant speaking. Isadora Vale. Not Iris the consultant. Isadora Vale, whose family owned the company that was destroying his life piece by piece. "Never mind," he said, ending the call. He stood on the sidewalk outside the building, looking up at the illuminated windows, wondering which one belonged to the woman who'd been lying to him for weeks. The woman who'd worn his jacket and walked through farmers markets with him while her company orchestrated the demolition of everything he valued. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Iris. From Isadora. From whoever she really was. "Caspian, please call me. I'm worried about you." He stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "I know who you are." The response came immediately. "Can we meet? I can explain everything." Explain what? How you've been lying to me while your company destroys my life. It's not what you think. Please, let me explain. I think I understand perfectly. The question is, did you know about the loan sharks too? Did you know about the collection agencies threatening my sister while you were pretending to care about me? The next message took longer to arrive. Yes, but I tried to stop it. I'm trying to fix this. Caspian stared at the screen, feeling something break inside him that had nothing to do with money or restaurants or medical bills. Something deeper, more fundamental. The belief that there were still good people in the world, that connections could be real, that someone might actually care about him for who he was rather than what they could get from him. He typed one final message, "Don't contact me again." Then he blocked her number and walked home through the Portland night, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. Isadora sat in her office at 3 in the morning, staring at her phone screen where Caspian's last message glowed like an accusation. "Don't contact me again." She tried calling from different numbers, but he'd blocked those too. Her assistant had reported that he'd hung up when she mentioned Vale Hospitality. The city spread out below her windows, a maze of lights that used to represent opportunity and success. Now it looked cold, indifferent to the wreckage she'd created. Her computer screen showed the signed contracts Henderson had delivered that morning. Grandma Rose's diner now belonged to Vale Hospitality, its demolition scheduled for the following week. The news had made the local business journal with a headline that made her stomach turn. Historic Portland diner falls to development pressure. A knock at her door interrupted her spiral of self-recrimination. Lysander entered without waiting for permission, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose plans had come together perfectly. "Congratulations," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk. "The Pioneer Square acquisition is complete. Construction can begin as soon as we clear the lot." "Don't." Her voice came out rougher than intended. "Don't celebrate this." "Why not? We just closed the biggest deal in company history. The board is ecstatic, the investors are happy, and you're acting like someone died." Someone had died. The person she'd been with Caspian, the version of herself that remembered what it felt like to care about something beyond profit margins and shareholder returns. The restaurant was special, Lysander. It meant something to people. It was a failed business model in a prime real estate location. Sentiment doesn't pay construction costs. He leaned against her desk, studying her face with growing concern. "What's really going on here? You've been acting strange for weeks." She could tell him about Caspian, about falling in love with someone whose life she'd helped destroy, about the way his eyes had looked when he realized who she was. But Lysander would see it as weakness, another sign that she wasn't fit to lead the company their grandfather had built. "I'm tired," she said instead. "It's been a long week. It's about to get longer. The board wants to fast-track the construction timeline. Ground breaks in 10 days, which means we need to finalize the contractor agreements and building permits by Friday." 10 days. In 10 days, the place where she'd first felt genuine connection with another person would be reduced to rubble and dust. What about the employees? The people who work there? What about them? They'll find other jobs. The job market is strong right now. She thought about Jenny, the waitress who'd worked there for 15 years, who knew every regular customer's order by heart. About Marcus, the young line cook who'd looked up to Caspian like an older brother. About Henderson, who'd poured his savings into keeping the place running because he understood what it meant to the community. We could offer them positions with our other properties. Waitressing and short-order cooking aren't exactly skills we need for luxury hotel operations. Lysander's patience was wearing thin. "Izzy, I need to know you're committed to this project. The board has some concerns about your leadership after Monday's meeting." "What kind of concerns?" "The kind that lead to votes of no confidence." Morrison has been making calls, feeling out support for potential changes in executive leadership. The threat hung between them like smoke. James Morrison had been pushing for cost-cutting measures and aggressive expansion since joining the board 2 years ago. If he sensed weakness in her position, he'd move quickly to consolidate power. "Let me guess. You'd be devastated to see me replaced." "I'd be devastated to see the company suffer because you can't separate personal feelings from business decisions." His voice softened slightly. "I'm trying to protect you here. Whatever's going on in your personal life, work it out before it destroys everything we've built." After he left, Isadora found herself scrolling through news articles about the restaurant's closure. Local food bloggers had picked up the story, interviewing regular customers who spoke about losing their neighborhood gathering place. One article included a quote from a woman named Ophelia Ashworth. "My brother poured his heart into that kitchen. It's not just a job for him, it's his calling. Now he's lost everything, and I don't know how he's going to recover." Ophelia, Caspian's sister, the one fighting cancer while drowning in medical debt. The one whose treatment had been used as leverage to pressure Caspian into submission. Isadora pulled up the financial records Lysander had shown her weeks ago, tracing the web of connections between Vale Hospitality and the collection agencies that had been harassing Caspian. The trail was carefully obscured, routed through shell companies and third-party contractors, but the pattern was clear enough. Her phone rang, interrupting her investigation. Vivian's name appeared on the screen. "Turn on Channel 8, Vivian said without preamble. "There's something you need to see." Isadora grabbed the remote, switching to the local news station. A reporter stood outside Grandma Rose's diner, interviewing a small crowd of protesters who'd gathered to oppose the demolition. Longtime customers and community members are calling for Vale Hospitality to reconsider their development plans, the reporter was saying. They argue that the restaurant serves as an important neighborhood anchor and should be preserved. The camera panned across the crowd, showing handmade signs with messages like "Save Our Diner" and "Communities Over Corporations." Near the back of the group, she spotted a familiar figure in a worn leather jacket. Caspian stood apart from the other protesters, his expression hollow as he watched the news crew work. He looked exhausted, defeated, like someone who'd already accepted that fighting was pointless. "This is a public relations nightmare," Vivian continued on the phone. "Social media is picking up the story. We're starting to look like corporate bullies targeting a beloved local business. How bad is it? Bad enough that Morrison is calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He wants to discuss image management and executive accountability." The words sent ice through Isadora's veins. Morrison was moving faster than expected, using the negative publicity as justification for a leadership challenge. What's his angle? That you've mismanaged the acquisition process and created unnecessary community backlash. He's arguing that proper leadership would have handled this more quietly. Quietly meaning with more threats and intimidation. Quietly meaning without protesters and negative news coverage that could affect our other properties. After ending the call, Isadora sat in the darkness of her office, watching the city lights blur as tears she'd been holding back for days finally spilled over. She'd gained everything her family expected from her and lost the one person who'd made her feel human. Her computer chimed with an email notification. A message from an address she didn't recognize, with a subject line that made her heart skip, from Ophelia Ashworth. She opened the message with trembling fingers. "Ms. Vale, I don't know if you'll read this, but I had to try. I'm Caspian's sister, the one with cancer that you probably read about in your corporate files. I know what your company did to pressure my brother, and I know you were the woman he was falling in love with. He doesn't know I'm writing this. He'd be furious if he found out. But I've watched him these past few days, and I've never seen him so broken. Not when I got diagnosed. Not when the bills started piling up. Not even when your people threatened to cut off my treatment. This is different. This is the kind of broken that doesn't heal. I don't know what happened between you two, but if there was anything real in it, anything worth saving, please don't let pride destroy it completely. He's a good man who deserves better than what your family has put him through. But I think you already know that." Ophelia, Isadora read the message 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. Caspian hadn't told his sister about their relationship, which meant he'd been protecting Isadora even after learning the truth about who she was. She picked up her phone, then put it down again. What could she say that would make any difference? How could she explain that she'd tried to stop the pressure campaign, that she'd fought against her own family's ruthless tactics? The truth was, she'd failed. Failed to protect him, failed to save the restaurant, failed to be the person he'd believed she was. Outside her window, Portland slept on, unaware that in a few hours, the machinery of corporate ambition would grind forward again, crushing whatever remained of the connection that had briefly made her believe in something beyond profit and power. But Ophelia's message had planted a dangerous seed, the idea that it wasn't too late, that some things were worth fighting for even when the odds were impossible. Even when fighting meant destroying everything she'd built to become the person Caspian had fallen in love with. The Vail Hospitality boardroom buzzed with tension as members filed in for the emergency meeting. Isadora arrived early, her laptop loaded with documents she'd spent the night compiling. Evidence of Lysander's criminal connections, financial records showing the shell companies used to funnel money to loan sharks, recorded phone conversations she'd managed to retrieve from her assistant's files. Morrison entered with his usual air of self-importance, followed by the other board members who'd been whispering in corners for weeks. Lysander came in last, his confidence radiating across the room like a challenge. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Morrison began, taking his seat at the opposite end of the table from Isadora. "Recent events have raised serious questions about our leadership and decision-making processes." "Recent events?" Isadora kept her voice level. "You mean the successful acquisition of prime real estate worth $50 million? I mean the public relations disaster that's cost us credibility and exposed us to potential litigation." Morrison activated the wall display, showing news footage of the protests outside Grandma Rose's diner. "This should have been handled quietly, professionally. Instead, we look like corporate villains bullying a beloved local business." Vivian leaned forward. "The social media backlash has been significant. Our brand reputation scores have dropped 15% in the past week. Which brings us to the central question," Morrison continued. "Is our current leadership still capable of making decisions that serve the company's best interests?" Isadora felt the familiar corporate machinery grinding around her, the same ruthless efficiency that had built empires and destroyed lives with equal indifference. But this time, she was ready. "Before we discuss leadership changes," she said, opening her laptop, "I think the board should know about some irregularities I've discovered in our acquisition methods." Lysander's expression didn't change, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that involve criminal enterprises and extortion." She activated her own presentation, and financial records filled the screen. "For the past 18 months, Vail Hospitality has been funneling money through shell companies to collection agencies with documented ties to organized crime." The room fell silent. Morrison studied the documents with the intensity of a man recognizing a trap closing around him. "These agencies have been used to pressure individuals connected to properties we want to acquire," Isadora continued. "Specifically, they've been threatening medical treatment for cancer patients whose family members work at target businesses." "That's a serious accusation," Morrison said carefully. "Do you have proof of direct authorization for these activities?" "I have recorded phone conversations, financial transfer records, and testimony from victims." She clicked to the next slide, showing Lysander's signed authorizations for payments to Cascade Financial Recovery. "I also have evidence that board members were aware of these methods and chose to look the other way." Morrison's face had gone pale. "I was never informed of any criminal activities. But you were informed of alternative pressure methods and chose not to ask for details." Isadora turned to face the full board. "We've become the kind of company that destroys families to increase profit margins. The question is whether we're going to continue down that path or remember what this company was supposed to represent." Lysander finally spoke, his voice carrying ice-cold fury. "Even if these allegations were true, which I'm not admitting, they represent isolated incidents in pursuit of legitimate business objectives." "Isolated incidents." Isadora pulled up another document. "Cascade Financial Recovery has received over $2 million from our shell companies in the past year alone. They've been used to pressure property owners, restaurant employees, small business contractors, anyone whose financial desperation could be leveraged to our advantage." "You're talking about business tactics that every major corporation uses," Lysander shot back. "Collection agencies, financial pressure, strategic negotiations. Nothing illegal about any of it. There is when the collection agencies are fronts for loan sharks who threaten to cut off cancer treatment for young women." Her voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "There is when we're using terror tactics against families already drowning in medical debt." She clicked to the final slide in her presentation. "Which brings me to my recommendation. Effective immediately, I'm proposing that we dissolve all contracts with Cascade Financial Recovery and their associated companies. We return any properties acquired through these methods to their original owners, and we cooperate fully with federal investigators who are already looking into organized crime connections in the debt collection industry." The silence that followed was deafening. Board members exchanged glances, calculating the legal and financial implications of her proposal. Morrison was the first to speak. "You're talking about abandoning millions of dollars in acquisitions. I'm talking about avoiding federal charges for racketeering and extortion." "Federal charges?" Vivian's voice cracked slightly. "How serious is the investigation?" Isadora had been bluffing, but the fear in Vivian's voice suggested she'd hit closer to the truth than expected. "Serious enough that we need to distance ourselves from these activities immediately." Lysander stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. You're sabotaging years of work based on sentimental attachment to a failing restaurant. I'm protecting this company from criminal liability. You're protecting the man you've been sleeping with." The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. Board members shifted uncomfortably, suddenly understanding the personal dynamics beneath the corporate maneuvering. "My personal relationships are irrelevant to this discussion," Isadora said, keeping her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "Are they? You've been romantically involved with the chef at Grandma Rose's diner, haven't you? The same chef whose sister was pressured by collection agencies. The same chef who's now leading protests against our development project." Morrison leaned back in his chair, reassessing the situation. "Is this true?" There was no point in denying it. The truth would come out eventually, and lies would only make everything worse. "Yes. I met Caspian Ashworth during my initial assessment of the property. Our relationship developed from there." "And you didn't think this represented a conflict of interest?" "I didn't know about the collection agency pressure when we first met. When I found out, I tried to stop it." "Tried and failed," Lysander added with obvious satisfaction. "Which brings us back to the fundamental question of leadership competence." Isadora looked around the table, seeing the calculation in every face. They were weighing risks now, deciding whether supporting her or Lysander represented the safer bet for their own positions. "There's something else you should know," she said, playing her final card. "The FBI contacted me yesterday. They've been investigating Cascade Financial Recovery for 6 months, and they have evidence linking their operations to money laundering and witness intimidation. Companies that have used their services are being offered cooperation agreements in exchange for testimony." It was a complete lie, but delivered with enough conviction to send visible shock waves around the table. Morrison cleared his throat. "What kind of cooperation agreements?" "The kind that protect board members from prosecution if they're willing to testify against the people who authorized criminal activities." All eyes turned to Lysander, whose confidence had finally cracked enough to show the panic underneath. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Are you willing to bet your freedom on that assumption?" The vote, when it came, was closer than expected. Morrison and 3 other board members supported Isadora's proposal to cut ties with the collection agencies and return the restaurant property. Lysander and his 2 closest allies voted against. Vivian, clearly terrified of potential legal consequences, cast the deciding vote in Isadora's favor. As the meeting broke up, Lysander cornered her by the elevator. "You think you've won something here," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But you've just destroyed your own company to protect a man who won't even speak to you." "Maybe, but at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Nobility doesn't pay shareholder dividends. This decision will cost us millions. Some things are worth more than money." He laughed, the sound bitter and cold. "Grandmother Rosa would be proud. You've turned into exactly the kind of sentimental fool she was." As the elevator doors closed between them, Isadora realized she didn't care anymore what Lysander thought, what the board thought, what the shareholders thought. For the first time in years, she'd made a decision based on what was right rather than what was profitable. Now she had to find a way to tell Caspian that his restaurant was safe, that his sister's treatment would continue, that the nightmare was finally over. Whether he'd be willing to listen was another question entirely. Caspian stood in the empty kitchen of Grandma Rose's diner, packing the last of his knives into their worn leather case. The demolition crew was scheduled to arrive in the morning, and Henderson had given him permission to take anything he wanted as a keepsake. The space felt hollow without the usual chaos of dinner service, the silence broken only by the hum of refrigerators that would soon be disconnected forever. He'd spent 3 years of his life in this kitchen, learning every quirk of the ancient equipment, perfecting recipes that would die with the building. His phone had been buzzing all afternoon with calls from unknown numbers, but he'd stopped answering after the fifth reporter trying to get a quote about the restaurant's closure. The protest movement had gained momentum over the past week, but it was too little, too late. Vale Hospitality held the deed now, and no amount of community outrage would change that. The front door chimed, and he looked up to see a familiar silhouette through the service window. Isadora stood in the dining room, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, his leather jacket draped over her arm like an offering. The door was unlocked, she said when he emerged from the kitchen. I wanted to return this. She held out the jacket, her hands trembling slightly. He took it without meeting her eyes, the leather still warm from her body, still carrying traces of her perfume. You shouldn't be here, he said, laying the jacket on the counter between them like a barrier. I know, but I needed to tell you something, and you blocked my number. I heard everything I needed to hear. You're Isadora Vale. Your family owns the company that destroyed my life, and you've been lying to me from the beginning. Yes to all of that, but you didn't hear the rest. He forced himself to look at her then, really look, and was startled by what he saw. The polished corporate executive was gone, replaced by someone who looked exhausted, vulnerable, stripped of pretense. What rest? The restaurant isn't being demolished. The words hit him like a physical blow. What? The board voted this morning to return the property to Henderson. The sale has been rescinded. Caspian stared at her, trying to process what she'd said. That's impossible. I saw the contracts. The demolition crew is coming tomorrow. The demolition has been canceled. Henderson should be getting the paperwork within the hour. She stepped closer, her voice gaining strength. Your job is safe. The restaurant is safe. Everything goes back to the way it was. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why would your company give up a $50 million development? Because I told them about the collection agencies, about the loan sharks, about everything Lysander did to pressure you and your sister. Her voice cracked slightly. Because I realized some things are worth more than money. And they just agreed to that. Gave up millions of dollars because you asked nicely. They agreed because they were terrified of federal prosecution. I may have implied that the FBI was investigating their business practices. Despite everything, Caspian felt his lips twitch with the ghost of a smile. Implied. I lied. Completely and convincingly. Turns out I'm better at deception than I thought. The silence stretched between them, filled with possibilities neither dared voice. Caspian walked to the window, looking out at the street where protesters had gathered just days ago, now empty except for the usual evening foot traffic. What about Ophelia's medical bills? Taken care of. Vale Hospitality is covering all outstanding costs and future treatment through a charitable foundation. He turned back to face her, searching her expression for signs of manipulation, for the calculated corporate maneuvering he'd learned to expect. Instead, he saw only exhaustion and something that looked like hope. Why? He asked again. Because I fell in love with you. Because watching you lose everything made me realize I'd already lost the only thing that mattered. She took another step closer. Because you showed me who I used to be before I became someone I didn't recognize. The woman who gave me her jacket that first night, who listened to me talk about food and dreams and stupid, impossible plans. That was real. That was the most real I'd been in years. Caspian picked up his jacket from the counter, studying the worn leather that had somehow become a bridge between their two worlds. Your brother was right about one thing. I can't trust you anymore. The pain that crossed her face was immediate and devastating. I know. But maybe, he continued, stepping toward her, maybe trust is something we can build together. If you're willing to start over. Start over. Hi, he said, extending his hand with a smile that felt rusty from disuse. I'm Caspian Ashworth. I'm a chef at a little diner downtown, and I'm terrible at managing money but excellent at making chocolate souffle. She stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, then took it with fingers that were still cold from the December air. I'm Isadora Vale. I run a hotel company. I'm recovering from a serious case of corporate sociopathy, and I recently discovered that some things matter more than profit margins. Nice to meet you, Isadora Vale. Nice to meet you too, Caspian Ashworth. They stood there in the restored diner, hands clasped, surrounded by the ghosts of meals served and dreams nearly lost, both of them damaged but willing to believe in second chances. Outside, Portland sparkled in the early evening light, a city full of possibilities for two people brave enough to choose love over fear, trust over safety, hope over the bitter lessons of the past.